And big promises of more inclusivity and action as India assumes the G20 presidency today. But amid global chaos, New Delhi must navigate diplomatic interests with its domestic concerns. And for more on India's G20 presidency, we're joined by Richard Rossow, a senior advisor, and Wadhani, chair in U.S.-India policy studies at CSIS. And he joins us from Washington, D.C. Richard, it's the first time India will hold the role of president for the G20. Their theme is the rather lofty One Earth, One Family, One Future. What should we expect?
Well, I think part of what we're going to expect is whether they get to drive the agenda or if external forces will drive the agenda. Right now, you've got a bit of a lull in terms of pressure India has felt over its benign position on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. COVID's in a bit of a lull. So apart from inflation and such, they've got a fairly clean slate to drive the agenda. The question is, will we have another more dangerous COVID variant? Will there be a further escalation, Russia-Ukraine, or something like that that's going to drive the agenda? But if they get to control it, their work on improving digital inclusivity, on expanding public services, these are all great things that I think they want to share with the world. So it could be a very positive agenda if they're able to write and shape it.
Richard, tensions over the China-India border dispute continue to simmer. Beijing, though, has said that the G20 is not the platform to discuss such matters and that anxiety over competition should just be put aside. Is India going to heed that call? What tone do you think Modi will take when it comes to China?
Yeah, I suspect the G20, they'll try to maintain a more positive platform. Although privately behind the scenes, he also has been nudging European leaders in particular to start paying more attention to the threats that countries like India face in the Indo-Pacific, a view that I think is widely shared, by the United States. So the side conversations vis-a-vis China may be a little bit more striking than I think anything that you're going to see publicly. Right now, again, Russia-Ukraine is probably the one global explosive area where the G7 members, the United States and Europe, will try to continue driving the agenda. And India is going to be in a very difficult position because, of course, they have long-standing warm ties with Russia, major defense supplier and such. So I think the bigger tension area on security is going to be Russia.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it does continue to vex world leaders. And India is being courted by all the players involved in the conflict. It has historical ties with Moscow, as you mentioned. It continues to buy discounted Russian crude while pursuing continued engagement with the West. Does this put India actually in a powerful position? Can it play a role in resolving this conflict, and should it be doing more?
Well, that's true. I think once President Putin decides what an endgame looks like, trying to broker some kind of an arrangement, whatever that's going to look like, whenever it happens, India is one of the few that can pick up a phone and speak to practically every world leader that would have a hand in deciding what kind of package looks reasonable and such. So you can definitely see India potentially playing, a significant role. But, again, the question is if and when, what is that going to look like? Is it something that the rest of the world can stomach? So they've held their powder. I think they're in a very comfortable place. Question is, they're going to be able to utilize it. And again, I don't suspect the G20 is going to be the place. I think those will be sidebar conversations, but we'll see how that plays out.
It is tradition to invite guest countries to participate, but the only South Asian country India has invited is Bangladesh. Of all of its neighbors, why only Bangladesh? And also, what does this tell us about India's commitment to strengthening cooperation in its own region?
Well, when Prime Minister Modi took office back in 2014, he recognized that most of his direct neighbors had actually started building warmer relations with Beijing than they had with Delhi. And so you've seen a very concerted effort by Delhi to try to rebuild ties throughout the region, supporting parties during elections in places like Maldives and Sri Lanka that are more supportive of the India relationship. But Bangladesh remains one of the largest countries in the world that nobody in the world really a lot of time for. 160 million people, growing faster than India, major exporter of garments. So there's a really positive story about Bangladesh that the world's kind of ignoring. So when you think of the scale, when you think of India trying to court Bangladesh, a lot of reasons why, if you're going to choose one among the neighbors, that would definitely be the one that you would go with.
And what else should we be looking out for with regard to India's presidency of the G20 moving forward?
Well, I think the biggest question that sits on the table right now, when you think about some of these contentious issues, not just Russia, Ukraine, but things like global climate finance, protectionism, as we all start to look on changing manufacturing supply chain. The question is, what role is India going to play in this? I think when you think of trade matters and things like that. India has generally chosen to be a leader of the developing world. Hopefully at the G20, they're going to instead choose to be the bridge builder. I would say, they were met with that confrontational approach, certainly by the West as well. But that's the big thing is, are they going to use some of these contentious issues to be the champion of developing world, or are they going to instead try to be the bridge builder? If they're the bridge builder, then maybe some success in Russia, maybe some success on things like climate change finance. There's some big things on the table which India has a big stake in.
Some argue, Richard, that India's assumption of the presidency is not just a routine change of guard and that it comes at a very significant juncture in history at a time when India's clout and credibility are growing. What will the biggest challenges be for India in 2023?
Well, they're going to look around the world. And I think since Modi came in, he's had a bit of a protectionist bent on trade. But now you see the United States and others looking to spend money to build up domestic manufacturing and such. So that puts India in a very hard place. They want to be the next best place to attract all that global manufacturing. They'd love for the G20 to be a platform to showcase, their power and might and manufacturing prowess. But the mood, I think, of other G20 members is more about onshoring and nearshoring to some extent. So that's going to be, I think, a tricky needle for India to thread. The United States, is certainly at the top of the list in terms of countries that are less aggressive in pursuing trade deals and looking more to kind of build out domestic manufacturing. And so I think that's probably one of the areas, apart from what I mentioned on climate in Russia, that India's going to have a difficult balancing act because they want to get a big piece of the pie in what's happening with supply chains evolving.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for your insights today, Richard. That was Richard M. Rossow, Senior Advisor, and Wadhwani Chair in U.S. India Policy Studies at CSIS.